I had just finished washing down my truck when I found the notice taped to my front door. Bright yellow paper, bold black letters, and a threatening tone that only an HOA could perfect. Violation, unauthorized vehicle on property. Fine, $500. Immediate payment required. My stomach dropped, then twisted into anger. My truck wasn't some rusted-out hunk of metal spilling oil all over the driveway. It was my pride and joy, a brand-new, silver Ford F-350 I'd worked years to afford. I stood there for a long moment, reading the paper again, half convinced I must have misinterpreted it. But there it was, clear as day. They were fining me $500 for the simple act of parking my truck in my own driveway. That was the moment I realized this HOA wasn't just strict, they were predatory. I could almost hear Karen, the HOA president, cackling from her house 3 streets over. She had complained about my truck before, saying it was too commercial looking for the neighborhood aesthetic. She didn't like that it had a lift kit. She didn't like that it made her little luxury SUV look small. And now, apparently, she didn't like that it existed at all. I went inside, tossed the notice on the kitchen counter, and started pacing. I had put up with this HOA's nonsense for almost a year. They'd send me letters about the color of my shutters being too warm, fined me for leaving my trash cans out 10 minutes past pickup, and even told me to trim a tree that technically grew outside my property line. Every single time, I paid the fine or fixed the problem just to keep the peace, but this truck fine was different. This was personal. This was a line in the sand, and I wasn't going to let them push me across it. The more I thought about it, the more I realized just how ridiculous their rule was. According to the HOA handbook, no commercial vehicles were allowed to park overnight in driveways. But my truck wasn't commercial, it was my personal vehicle, registered in my name, insured like any other. The HOA had no real grounds for this fine, they were just trying to bully me. I sat down with my laptop and read through the HOA's bylaws line by line, highlighting every clause about parking and vehicles. They were vague enough to allow interpretation, which meant Karen and her board could twist the rules however they wanted. My blood boiled as I read more. This entire HOA was a scam, designed to extract as much money as possible from homeowners under the guise of maintaining property values. I decided then and there I wasn't paying a dime. In fact, I wasn't just going to fight the fine, I was going to make sure they'd never be able to pull something like this again. That night, I started doing some serious digging. I learned that the HOA leased the community's driveways from the county as part of a public easement agreement. That meant, technically, every driveway was under county jurisdiction, not the HOA's private authority. And since my day job involved commercial property management, I had a few connections in the county office who owed me a favor or two. The next morning, I made a few calls, filed a few requests, and within 48 hours I had a signed lease agreement giving me control over every single driveway in the neighborhood. It felt like holding the nuclear launch codes. With that lease in my hand, the HOA no longer had jurisdiction over parking enforcement, I did. I could legally grant parking permission to anyone I wanted and revoke it for anyone I didn't. If I wanted to let a convoy of semi-trucks park up and down the street, I could. If I wanted to let my neighbors park their boats, RVs, or monster trucks in their driveways, I could. The HOA had lost its teeth, and they didn't even know it yet. I didn't tell anyone at first, I wanted to savor the moment. I parked my truck right in the middle of my driveway that night, cleaned and polished until it gleamed under the streetlights. The next morning, another notice appeared on my door, another $500 fine. This time, I didn't even get mad. I just smiled, took the notice inside, and pinned it to my fridge like a trophy. They had no idea they were about to lose the biggest power play they'd ever had. I was about to turn the entire neighborhood against them, one driveway at a time. The first neighbor I told was Mike, the guy 2 houses down who had been in constant battles with the HOA over his fishing boat. He was a quiet guy, ex-military, who kept mostly to himself but had a soft spot for anyone who got unfairly pushed around. I caught him in his driveway on a Saturday morning, tightening straps on his boat trailer like he always did before heading to the lake. "You're not gonna believe this," I said, holding up the lease agreement like it was a winning lottery ticket. He took one look at it and his eyebrows shot up. "You mean to tell me," he said slowly, "that you control every driveway in this neighborhood now?" I grinned and nodded. "Which means," I added, "that if you want to keep this boat parked right here for the rest of the year, nobody can say a damn thing about it." For the first time in months, I saw him smile. A real one. He shook my hand hard and said, "Then let's make sure they know they're not in charge anymore." Word spread faster than wildfire. Within a week, neighbors were knocking on my door, asking if the rumors were true. Could they really park their RVs now? Could they keep their work vans at home without getting fined? Could they finally stop worrying about whether the HOA patrol would drive by at 11 p.m. snapping photos? Every single time, I told them yes, and I printed out a copy of my agreement to prove it. By the end of the week, there were boats, campers, trailers, and trucks in almost every driveway. It was like watching a prison yard break open. People who had been living under the HOA's thumb for years suddenly felt free, and they weren't about to give that freedom back. Karen, of course, was livid. She started marching door to door, clipboard in hand, threatening everyone with fines and hearings. I stayed inside and watched from my window, laughing as she went from house to house only to be met with neighbors pointing to me. Eventually she stomped up my walkway, heels clicking like gunfire, and started banging on my door. I opened it calmly, holding my coffee in one hand and the lease agreement in the other. "You can't do this," she shrieked before I even said hello. "This is a direct violation of HOA policy." I handed her a copy of the lease with a smile. "Actually," I said, "this is a direct override of HOA policy. As of last week, I control every driveway in this community. Your board has no jurisdiction over parking anymore. So go ahead and write your fines if it makes you feel better, they're legally worthless." Her face turned the color of an overripe tomato. "You can't just," she sputtered, but I cut her off. "I can, Karen." And I did. "And unless you want to challenge this in county court, where I'll happily let a judge explain it to you, I suggest you tell your board to back off before they start racking up harassment claims." She stood there frozen for a moment, speechless, then stormed off without another word. I could hear her yelling into her phone as she stomped down the street, no doubt calling an emergency HOA meeting. Sure enough, the next night, the HOA held a special session at the clubhouse. I went, of course, I wouldn't have missed it for the world. The room was packed with neighbors, most of them looking more excited than angry. The board sat up front, stiff and self-important, while Karen stood at the podium waving a stack of papers. She launched into a speech about how the character of the neighborhood was being destroyed by unsightly vehicles, and how someone was enabling it. When she finally pointed at me, accusing me of sabotage, I calmly stood up, walked to the front of the room, and laid my lease agreement on the podium for everyone to see. "This isn't sabotage," I said, my voice loud and clear. "This is legal authority. The HOA never owned the driveways, the county did. And now, the county leases them to me. So as far as parking goes, I am the authority here. Not you." The room erupted. People started cheering, clapping, even laughing. Some neighbors actually stood up and started chanting my name like I was some kind of hero. The board looked stunned, like someone had just pulled the rug out from under them, which, in a way, I had. Karen tried to regain control of the room, but it was too late. The neighbors had seen proof with their own eyes, and for the first time ever, they weren't afraid of her. After that night, the whole neighborhood changed. People started hanging out in their driveways, talking to each other more, sharing beers and stories like it was a block party every evening. Without the threat of HOA harassment hanging over everyone's head, the community actually became friendlier. And I made sure to keep things fair. I didn't let the place turn into chaos. If someone wanted to park something truly massive, like a shipping container, we worked it out so it didn't block traffic. But otherwise, I let people live how they wanted. It felt good, not just to win, but to give everyone else a win too. Still, I knew Karen wasn't done. She wasn't the kind of person who just gave up after losing one battle. I started hearing whispers that she was trying to get the county to void my lease, claiming it was improperly granted. She even hired a lawyer to look into it. But I was ready. I had documented every step of the process, every email, every signed form. If she wanted to take this to court, I would drag her and the entire HOA board through discovery and make them explain to a judge why they'd been fining people illegally for years. And that's when I decided to go one step further. If Karen wanted a war, I was going to give her one, on my terms. I started organizing the neighbors into what we jokingly called the Driveway Alliance. We pooled money for a community legal fund, hired an attorney of our own, and began drafting a proposal to dissolve the HOA entirely. Once we officially formed the Driveway Alliance, things moved fast. Mike, being ex-military, volunteered to act as our coordinator, and he ran it like a tactical operation. We had weekly meetings, not at the clubhouse, obviously, but in my garage, which quickly became headquarters. We hung a big whiteboard on the wall and mapped out every move, legal filings, petition signatures, media contacts. I even reached out to a local news station I'd worked with once before on a zoning issue. Within a week, they were running a segment about the neighborhood taking its power back. The camera crews came, filmed my truck front and center, and interviewed neighbors about how the HOA had harassed them for years. It was perfect. By the time the story aired, Karen's reputation was in shambles. Parents at the local school were whispering about her in the pickup line, and even a few of the HOA board members started quietly distancing themselves from her. But Karen wasn't done, she doubled down. She sent out a letter claiming that the Driveway Alliance was an illegal organization operating in violation of HOA rules. That one made me laugh so hard I almost framed it. I posted a copy of the letter on our community Facebook page, along with the legal documents proving we had every right to organize. The comments section lit up like a bonfire. People who had never spoken up before were suddenly sharing their own stories of harassment, pictures of ridiculous fines, copies of violation notices over things as petty as kids' bicycles being left out overnight. It was like the floodgates had opened. We got over 70% of the homeowners to sign our petition to dissolve the HOA, way more than the majority required by law. With that many signatures, Karen couldn't just ignore us. We submitted the petition to the county, along with evidence that the HOA had been exceeding its authority for years by fining people for things it legally couldn't regulate. Our lawyer told us we had a rock-solid case. The county scheduled a hearing. The night before the hearing, Karen showed up at my house unannounced. It was late, almost 10 o'clock, and I found her standing on my porch, arms crossed, face pale but determined. "Do you have any idea what you're doing?" she demanded as soon as I opened the door. "You're going to ruin this neighborhood. Property values will plummet. It'll be chaos." I leaned against the doorframe, calm as ever, and said, "Karen, the only chaos around here comes from you and your board micromanaging everyone's lives. This community doesn't need you, we're doing better without you already." For a second, I almost thought she might cry. But then her jaw set, and she hissed, "If you go through with this, I will sue you personally." For damages. For defamation. For harassment. You think you're some kind of hero, but you're just a bully with a piece of paper. I smiled slowly and stepped closer. Go ahead and sue me, Karen. Because the first thing my lawyer will do is subpoena every financial record this HOA has ever kept. And when the county sees how many thousands of dollars you've collected in bogus fines, they won't just dissolve the HOA, they might press charges. Are you sure you want to roll those dice? She didn't say another word. She turned on her heel, marched back to her car, and peeled out of my driveway so fast she almost clipped the mailbox. I watched her taillights disappear down the street, and I knew then, we had her. The hearing was the final blow. Our lawyer presented our case in front of the county board, laying out everything, the illegal fines, the misuse of power, the harassment campaigns. We had neighbors testify one after another, sharing how the HOA had humiliated them, cost them money, and even threatened them. By the time it was over, the county board was visibly disgusted. They voted unanimously to dissolve the HOA and place the neighborhood under standard county code enforcement. When the gavel came down, the room erupted in cheers. People hugged, clapped, even cried. Karen sat silently in the back row, face pale, looking like she'd just watched her empire crumble, which, in a way, she had. The very next day, I got a letter from the HOA, or rather, the former HOA, formally acknowledging its dissolution. The board had resigned en masse. The clubhouse was closed. The HOA bank account was frozen pending an audit. Karen's name was mud. Some neighbors told me she had put her house up for sale. But I wasn't done yet. I wanted to make sure no one could ever pull something like this again. I worked with the county to create a new neighborhood association, voluntary, not mandatory, with a charter that explicitly protected homeowners' rights to park their vehicles, decorate their homes, and live their lives without harassment. We called it the Freedom Association, and every single neighbor joined. It felt incredible, standing there that night at our first official meeting, looking around at a room full of smiling faces. People were free, really free, for the first time since they'd moved in. And it all started with a $500 truck fine. In the weeks following the hearing, the entire neighborhood felt like a completely different place. For years, there had been this constant tension hanging over everything, an invisible weight pressing down on everyone's shoulders. The HOA patrol car used to cruise the streets like a shark looking for its next meal. Now it was gone. Instead of people hiding in their houses, afraid to get another violation letter, they were out front, waving at each other, talking, actually acting like neighbors. Kids rode their bikes in the cul-de-sacs without parents frantically checking their watches to make sure the toys would be put away before curfew. People started planting gardens, putting up holiday decorations, parking proudly in their own driveways. It was as if we had all been living in black and white, and suddenly the world had turned to color. I kept getting stopped by neighbors who wanted to thank me. Some brought over pies, cookies, even cases of beer. One family who had been thinking about moving told me they'd changed their minds now that the HOA was gone. This feels like home again, they said, and hearing that nearly choked me up. I hadn't realized how bad things had gotten until I saw how happy people were now. Karen, on the other hand, didn't take her defeat gracefully. She kept to herself for the most part, but every once in a while I'd catch her standing on her porch, glaring at the boats and trucks lining the street like they were personal insults. I knew she was still stewing, probably plotting some kind of comeback, but she was out of moves. The county's audit of the HOA accounts turned up thousands of dollars in unaccounted-for administrative fees, and rumor had it she might even face charges if they proved she'd been skimming funds. The board members who had supported her suddenly wanted nothing to do with her, and she became a kind of neighborhood ghost, there but not really part of the community anymore. One afternoon, about a month after the dissolution, I came home to find a for sale sign in her yard. She didn't even bother trying to be subtle about it. The house was staged and on the market within a week. When I saw the moving truck pull up, I stood at my window and watched as she loaded her things, face tight and pale, not looking at anyone. Part of me almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered all the nights I'd spent stressing over her ridiculous fines and threats, all the money she'd stolen from my neighbors, all the fear she'd caused, and I didn't feel sorry anymore. She had built her kingdom on control and intimidation, and when we took that control away, she had nothing left. With Karen gone, the Freedom Association really started to flourish. We organized monthly block parties, set up a community watch program that actually worked, without harassing anyone, and even started a shared tool library so people could borrow lawn equipment, ladders, power washers, whatever they needed. The neighborhood became more self-sufficient, more cooperative. People actually wanted to help each other now. And because we were no longer paying HOA dues, we all had a little extra cash each month to put into our own homes and lives. Property values didn't plummet like Karen had warned. In fact, they actually went up. Turns out, buyers liked the idea of a neighborhood that wasn't run by a tyrannical HOA president. My truck became a kind of symbol for the whole movement. People started jokingly calling it the Freedom Ford, and whenever I parked it out front, I noticed people giving it a little nod as they drove by. It reminded them of what we'd fought for, and what we'd won. Personally, I felt more at peace than I had in years. The constant stress was gone. I could come home from work, park in my driveway, and just sit there for a minute, breathing in the quiet satisfaction of knowing I had stood up to the HOA and won. And it wasn't just about me, it was about the entire neighborhood. We'd taken back control of our lives, and we'd done it together. But there was one last thing I wanted to do before I considered the whole ordeal truly over. I took the original $500 fine notice, the one that had started it all, out of the folder where I'd been keeping it and had it framed. I hung it on the wall of my garage, right above the whiteboard where the Driveway Alliance had once planned every move. It was a reminder of what we'd been through, and what we'd accomplished. Every time I walked into the garage and saw it, I couldn't help but smile. Life moved on. The Freedom Association eventually became less about fighting and more about building community, building trust, building a place where people actually wanted to live. New families moved in, and we made sure they felt welcome from day one. We handed them a copy of the voluntary charter, not as a threat, but as an invitation. Here's what we believe. Here's how we do things. You're free to live how you want, we just ask you to respect your neighbors. And almost everyone did. It turned out that people didn't need a strict HOA to keep a neighborhood nice, they just needed a little freedom, and a little trust. It's been over a year since the day the county dissolved the HOA, and sometimes I still catch myself smiling when I pull into the neighborhood. Things are different now, not just on paper, but in spirit. The streets are alive in a way they never were before. Kids race each other on scooters, neighbors host weekend cookouts, and driveways that were once empty and sterile are now full of life. Trucks, campers, basketball hoops, even a few vintage muscle cars that their owners had been hiding away for fear of getting fined. The neighborhood feels lived in, not just curated, and somehow it looks better for it. There's a kind of pride here now, not forced pride out of fear of a violation letter, but pride that comes from knowing we fought for this freedom together. Looking back, it's almost funny how it all started. Just a $500 fine. That little piece of paper lit a fire under me, and that fire spread until the entire neighborhood was burning with the same determination. I've thought a lot about why it worked, why we were able to take down something that had been controlling us for so long. And I think it comes down to this: people don't like being pushed around. They'll put up with it for a while, sure. They'll grumble and complain quietly, they'll pay the fines just to keep the peace. But eventually, everyone has a line. And once that line gets crossed, there's no going back. That's what Karen never understood. She thought the HOA could just keep pushing, keep squeezing, and we'd keep obeying. She thought fear was enough to keep people in line forever. But fear only works until someone decides to stand up to it. The moment I parked my truck in my driveway that second night, knowing full well they'd try to find me again, I stopped being afraid. And once I stopped being afraid, they had no power over me anymore. When I showed that lease agreement to my neighbors, they stopped being afraid too. And once enough of us stood together, there was nothing Karen or her board could do. If there's one thing I've learned from all this, it's that power is only as strong as the people who agree to follow it. The HOA's power wasn't some magical thing, it was just a set of rules we all agreed to obey. The second we stopped agreeing, those rules stopped meaning anything. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, I'll sit out in my driveway with a beer and watch the sun go down. Mike usually comes over and sits with me, and we'll talk about how far we've come. You know, he said once, leaning back in his chair, this neighborhood used to feel like a prison. Now it feels like a small town. He wasn't wrong. People actually wave when they drive by now. They stop to chat. There's a sense of belonging that no rulebook could ever enforce. The framed violation notice still hangs in my garage, and it still makes me smile. It's a reminder that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you ends up being the best thing that ever happened. If I hadn't gotten that fine, I might never have dug into the bylaws. I might never have discovered the county lease loophole. Karen would probably still be running the HOA like her own personal kingdom, and we'd all still be miserable. But instead, we fought back, and we won. Karen sold her house, moved away, and as far as I know, she hasn't tried to get involved in another HOA since. The county audit eventually confirmed what we'd suspected. Thousands of dollars in administrative fees had been siphoned into personal accounts. I heard through the grapevine that she had to pay back a huge chunk of money and that she might even have been banned from serving on any HOA boards in the state. That part wasn't my doing, that was just karma doing its job. And as for me, I'm still here. Still parking my truck proudly in the same driveway they once said I couldn't use. Still looking after this community, not as some kind of dictator, but as a neighbor who cares about keeping it fair for everyone. The Freedom Association runs smoothly, mostly on autopilot now. We don't need constant meetings or rules to keep things going. People just do the right thing, because they want to. Sometimes I wonder what new families think when they move in. Do they know what this place used to be like? Do they realize how close it came to becoming just another soulless, over-regulated subdivision? Maybe they don't, and that's fine. Maybe all they need to know is that they're welcome here, that they can live how they want, and that no one is going to harass them for parking in their own driveway. When I tell the story to friends outside the neighborhood, they can hardly believe it. You lease every driveway, they ask, laughing like I'm making it up. And I just smile and say, yep. Every single one. Because it's true, and because it's still the single most satisfying sentence I've ever gotten to say. And so, every night when I park my truck, I take one last look at it before going inside. It's not just a truck anymore. It's a reminder of everything we went through, everything we built, everything we won back. A reminder that sometimes standing up for yourself doesn't just change your life, it changes an entire community. And if you ask me, that's worth a lot more than $500.